300-pound dudes tackling you on a frozen field, the last thing you want to do is stay out there. Believe me, the Rams players were thinking about the jacuzzi at their team hotel, that they find it laughable, but more laughable if they totally disregard the trade whatsoever. This guy has transformed the balance of power in the Eastern Conference. And you could argue the entire defense is going to be absolutely ferocious next year. But if your number one priority is to win a Super Bowl, then J.J. Watt is making a grave mistake. To ride this Chad Henne experiment for an entire game, I might need a whole bottle of Hennessy just to get through that. Guy who's won 8 division titles, who's made 5 AFC championship appearances, who's reached the Super Bowl 3 times and has won 2 Super Bowls for this organization. Aaron Rodgers has only won 1 Super Bowl with Green Bay. Drew Brees has only won 1 Super Bowl with New Orleans. There's only 13 quarterbacks in NFL history that have won multiple Super Bowls, and Big Ben is one of those individuals. Good morning and welcome to Morning Joe right here on JNJ Network, Facebook Live, Twitter, and on YouTube. I'm Jonah with you every single Monday and Wednesday morning, 11 a.m. 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Hope you all had a lovely Mother's Day yesterday. Appreciate you tuning in today on this lovely Monday morning. A lot to discuss, some key takeaways and thoughts from some of the NBA playoff games that have taken place over the weekend. And perhaps we're seeing the new tennis superstar. I'm going to touch on that and Carlos Alcaraz's Madrid Open win in a little bit. But I have to start with the NBA playoffs and specifically 2 of the number 1 seeds, because the 2 1-4 matchups that we got between the Phoenix Suns and the Dallas Mavericks and the Miami Heat and the Philadelphia 76ers, these are starting to turn into some really fun basketball series, both tied at 2 apiece. The Mavericks protected home court over the weekend. They won game 4 yesterday, 111-101. Philadelphia 76ers, they did as well. They protected home court. They won the second and the 4th overall game of the series on their home floor, 116-108. So we've got 2-2 series between the top seeds in the West and in the East against the 4 seeds. But I'll touch on the kind of struggles of Chris Paul and how incredible Luka Doncic has been in the Suns and Mavericks series in a little bit, because I do think that it is important to talk about. But the question is, which one of these number 1 seeds is truly in more trouble? And to me, again, even though Chris Paul has struggled as of late in the last couple of games, to me, it clearly belongs to the Miami Heat. I'm going to explain why. When you look at where the if the compass was going to swing and was going to oscillate in a different direction, which series and which reason is going to be the bigger impetus for that swing? To me, it's Joel Embiid's return with the 76ers. That, to me, is the biggest reason why the Miami Heat and the Philadelphia 76ers, why that series looks perhaps like it could be more destined to swing and tilt in the direction of the Philadelphia 76ers than perhaps a game of which team's role players are going to maximize home court a little bit better and shoot the ball well when they're at home versus when they're on the road, which to me is kind of the bigger story and takeaway from the Suns and the Mavericks is the role players have just been playing better at home, and that's what we expect. Role players typically play better at home than they do on the road. So the return of Joel Embiid is the bigger compass swing in the direction of the series to me, because the entire game plan and the approach to what the Miami Heat have had to do and prepare for against the Philadelphia 76ers, it's completely changed with the reassertion of Joel Embiid into this series. They had to completely efface their previous game plan, throw it all out in the garbage, and start anew. Because the way the bevy of ways that he manipulates the game, and what we've already seen in the way that Miami has attacked the 76ers in the first two games versus the way that the 76ers have responded in the last two because of his presence, offensively, it's innumerable because primarily he creates more freedom of space on the floor for James Harden to operate. That's the biggest key. James Harden's got all this space now to kind of to dance on guys, to get open shots, because we've seen he's been slowing down. And of course, he drops his arguably his best game as a Philadelphia 76er. 31 points, 7 rebounds, 9 assists, including several clutch threes down the stretch and in the fourth quarter. He had 16 points in the fourth quarter. In the previous 3 games, James Harden had a total of 10 points in the fourth quarters of the first 3 games, as opposed to 16 in game 4. And why? Why is that? Well, instead of, first of all, having to operate one-on-one every single time in Miami, and instead of trying to run pick and roll and get a switch where Joel Embiid or a potential big would have the advantage down low, James Harden, if he switched on to a Jimmy Butler. Kyle Lowry is switching on to him. You have PJ Tucker switching on to him. The Heat have length that was disrupting him in the first 2 games of the series because he couldn't break free and he couldn't kind of unhinge himself against those guys. Well, now that he's able to operate a little bit more freely, we're seeing a better version of James Harden. And instead of a guy who looked to be deteriorating before our very eyes, and a guy who you were really contemplating and trying to rationally find some reasons to convince yourself to offer the max contract to him this offseason, now he looks like a guy who's an all-star, where it doesn't need quite as much convincing, and you can kind of wrap your arms around giving this guy a max contract in the setting that he's in if he's playing like this. Makes a little bit more sense. You can wrap your mind around that at this stage of his career. But that turn and his ability to free himself up, now it opens the floor for all the other guys. And that's why this is creating such a seismic shift in the ground for the Philadelphia 76ers. They've got a much stronger foothold in this series because Miami Heat have no defensive answer for Joel Embiid. As great as Bam Adebayo is, as versatile as he is, as elite of a defensive player as he is, and he is all of those things, he doesn't maintain the same girth, the same height, the same length to really disrupt Joel Embiid's shot inside. And that's why, to me, now you're seeing guys like Tyrese Maxey and Tobias Harris and Danny Green. These guys are able to get to the rim. They're getting more open shots. It's because now Bam can't really switch on to them and shut them down. He's got to stay locked to Embiid. He's pulling him away from those 2 or those 3 or 4 other guys on the perimeter for the 76ers. So offensively, we're seeing the impact, not to mention obviously what he brings you offensively. And again, despite the fact that the guy is playing through an orbital fracture, a torn labrum in his shooting hand, the guy can do everything. He's been hitting the mid-range. He's been collecting rebounds, providing Philly with extra possessions, spacing the floor better for the entire team, providing a little bit more depth for the team. So that way the starters aren't having to be extended quite as much. But then defensively, and this is the aspect of Joel Embiid that I think people don't give him enough credit for, all those wide open looks, all those shots that Miami Heat was sinking in the first 2 games. I'm not saying that Joel Embiid is the entire reason behind all of their missed shots on the road, but I do think that his length is bothering them. He's contesting more shots. He's giving the Miami Heat shooters a little bit more to think about now as they're coming off screens, as they're trying to see the back of the rim. You got a huge 7'1" monster in the middle rising up, trying to contest the shot. I do think that starts to linger in the back of your mind, obviously he's clogging the middle, so he's forcing everything along the perimeter. But I just think that they've got no defense for him. He's a mismatch nightmare every single time down the floor, and he single-handedly changes the series. Now, obviously, Miami has home court advantage, so we'll see ultimately if it just comes down to whether they can make or miss shots. But the reason I say the Miami Heat are in more trouble than the Phoenix Suns is because tactically you have to make more adjustments. You have to make more changes to account for Joel Embiid's presence. Whereas with Phoenix and the Mavericks, right now, what I've seen is the first two games versus the last two, Dallas's level of physicality has ratcheted up at home in those two games. But the main thing is you've got guys like Dorian Finney-Smith, Jalen Brunson, Davis Bertans, the role guys that played a lot better at home than they did on the road. And to me, when it comes to Philly and Miami, the actual X's and O's of the game are what change with Joel Embiid's presence. And I think that's, again, a bigger – now you have to look at this lens. You have to look through this telescope from a totally different perspective and alter the game plan completely. And so that's why, to me, I think Miami is a little bit more in trouble here because they really just don't have an answer, and they have to try and start from scratch with a game plan to take on this monster who's been introduced midway into the series. But again, there's no question that even Chris Paul's got to play better, and I think he will at home. I'm not too concerned about him. It really, for me, was Dallas's perimeter guys were making shots. They were able to create a little bit more space for Luka. Luka is playing a little bit more in check, but they're being a lot more physical. And that's allowed them to kind of get to the line, earn the whistle, and get Phoenix in foul trouble. But I think there are fewer changes for the Suns. It's more, hey, maybe we can start to shoot better. Mikal Bridges probably doesn't give you just 5 points in Game 5 like he did in Game 4. I just don't see that necessarily happen. So Phoenix is in a heap of trouble. There's no question about that. But again, you have to assess the degree and the triage of worry, I'd give it slightly to Miami in this regard. Okay. So I want to transition to the Golden State Warriors and the Memphis Grizzlies. Game 4 is tonight. It's been reported that Ja Morant likely won't play tonight. It's not definitive, but there's a strong likelihood that he will not be available tonight. He got injured in the third quarter of Game 3 against the Warriors on Saturday night, a game that the Warriors won 142-112. But Ja didn't return midway through the third quarter. So I picked the Golden State Warriors to win this series in six games. I just felt that their talent, that their experience, that their overall refinery at this stage of the postseason would prevail over Ja's individual heroics. Because as great as Ja is, I didn't think he individually could power and propel the Grizzlies to the Western Conference Finals. Now, obviously, he was able to do that in Game 2. But for an entire series, I thought it would be really tough for him to sustain. And I also predicted and expected that every game would be extremely competitive, would be extremely testy, it'd be narrow, there'd be clutch shot making, and that's what we've been getting. And so far, what we saw Game 1 really kind of set the tone and highlighted what we were all anticipating and what we were all expecting. 1-point win for the Warriors, 117-116. You had stars being stars. The best was required, and the stars shined the brightest. It was competitive. It was back and forth. It was chippy, which is what we all expected. That's what we got. And yet, at the end of the day, what was it overshadowed by? It was overshadowed by Draymond Green's second quarter ejection after hard fouling Brandon Clark. And now, instead of effusively praising Ja Morant for his 47-point performance in Game 2. And instead of praising the Warriors' absolute dominance in Game 3 at home, in which they blew out the Grizzlies by 30 points, instead of all that, it's all been overshadowed by hard fouls, injuries, and the NBA's officiating. And that just disgusts me. I hate that these performances have been marred and have been stained by narratives being perpetuated and by storylines that shouldn't be storylines taking over the front page of newspapers, of tabloids, of sports talk shows as topics, because we go from Game 2 is the Dillon Brooks ejection game, and Gary Payton II ends up fracturing his elbow, and obviously it's important to talk about the impact of his loss, the impact of his absence with the Warriors, and what that means, because it's important, and he was the primary defender of Ja. But then what it did was it stripped us of being able to be in awe of Ja Morant's masterpiece. That 47-point performance in Game 2 was legendary from a guy who's trying to prove himself in the NBA, who's ascending in the league. And all of that was glossed over to debate whether or not Dillon Brooks should have been ejected or not. And then that's when you bring Steve Kerr into the equation, and he calls it a dirty play and that he broke the code, and all the players have to chime in, and the coaches have to respond to the players chiming in. And then the players have to respond to the coaches responding to the players, responding to the refs chiming in. And to me, I hate when that kind of infiltrates the storylines of games, because then we saw what happened in Game 3. Ja Morant is injured because Jordan Poole makes a questionably dangerous play, what appeared to be tugging at his knee. Now, do we know for a fact that was the cause of the injury necessarily? It certainly, I don't want to say definitively, but Ja Morant didn't return in the third quarter. So we can kind of deduce, well, probably the knee soreness flared up once it was tugged on. And now Ja Morant, we might be deprived of him in Game 4. And so what was the storyline again after Game 3? It wasn't about the Warriors' performance. Was this a dirty play? And Ja Morant came out on social media. He commented on the view on the video, said broke the code, taking a shot at Steve Kerr, who was taking a shot at Dillon Brooks, who potentially was defending Brandon Clark after Draymond Green's ejection. So to me, I've never seen a discussion around a series revolve so much around the important and relevant, but yet secondary takeaways from these games. I've never seen the discussion around outcomes be so swung and focused on the injuries and the ejections. I haven't seen those be so prominently featured before. It's so frequently discussed. Those elements are just so prominent right now in this series that we're overlooking the actual talent that's been played. Because again, we have Draymond Green's ejection. He immediately releases the emergency pod in the emergency basketball State of the Union. You got Dillon Brooks with the ejection. Should he or should he not be punished? Gary Payton's injury. How did that influence his punishment? Then Jordan Poole pulling at Ja Morant's knee. Now Ja Morant's unlikely to play in Game 4. I just hate how it has seeped into this series, because it's stained. It has stained the image of this series. It's marred the performances that we've seen, which it should never do. It really should never do. I just hate that it's consumed and has been plastered all over the headlines of all these talk shows and newspapers and stories. And instead of talking about the play, we're talking about that. And again, not that it's not relevant, because it is, but that's been my biggest takeaway. All 3 games, you've got all this nonsense drama going on around it. And I hate that. I really hate that. So I hope that Ja Morant can play tonight. If he can't, I hope he can play for game 5. You never want to see any of the big time players go down. But it is what it is. It is what it is. Okay. So I want to transition to tennis, because yesterday, the 19-year-old teenage tennis sensation Carlos Alcaraz, he won the 2022 Madrid Open Men's Tennis Tournament, defeated Alexander Zverev in the final 6-3, 6-1 straight sets, claimed his 4th title in 2022, became the 2nd youngest player to win 2 Masters 1,000 titles. It caps off an extraordinary week in which he beat his longtime Spanish idol, Rafael Nadal. He beat Novak on clay, and he beat Novak Djokovic in the same tournament in a tiebreaker. I mean, again, he beat Nadal in 3 sets. He beat Djokovic in 3 sets in a tiebreaker. And he became the youngest player to defeat the world number 1, a world number 1. And to make it even more special to me for him is the fact that he got to do it, obviously, in his home country. He is from Spain. Madrid Open, right in the heart of Spain, right in Madrid. And it's a beautiful, beautiful moment for him. Just completely dominant this entire tournament. And especially, I think that the final was kind of a microcosm of the run that he's been on, of complete another dominance. This is a guy who committed only 11 errors in the final, as opposed to 25 committed by Zverev. He never faced a break point. Alcaraz never. When he had the opportunity to break in 8 instances, he converted on 50% on 4 out of 8 of those times. He was just in his bag. And the clay courts are very interesting. I'm going to touch on Alcaraz specifically in a moment, but the clay courts are very interesting because they tend to favor younger athletic tennis players, guys that maintain a little bit better agility, that can be a little bit more off balance. I mean, to be honest, I was actually surprised that Zverev was in the final, not because he isn't a great player, because he is, and he also won the Madrid Open last year, but because typically, again, guys like Zverev aren't necessarily moving around that well on a clay court. They don't have the same balance. They don't have the same central base to operate from like they would on hard, where on a hard court or harder courts, the surface is more balanced. The bounces are a little truer to form, so there's less unpredictability. In tennis on a clay court, each court's got differing features. On a clay court, the bounces are much more unpredictable. They're much more arbitrary. Balls just drop. It's almost like every ball is hit with slice, and it just drops like that. Grass is much faster, is much quicker. Hard, it just is a true bounce. Clay is a very unique surface. So because of the sliding aspect of clay, because again of the unpredictability of the bounces, it makes it such a difficult court to win on, but it also benefits those athletes that are a little quicker, that are a little bit more mobile, a little bit more agile, a little bit more athletic. And Alcaraz, he's becoming one of those guys where you looked at a guy like Nadal and you said Nadal is an extreme and elite athlete. Nadal, his athleticism is not only what's allowed him to prevail on clay and become the king of clay, but it's his ability and it has been his ability over the course of his career to, while being off balance and sliding, still maintain composure, power, and finesse. Again, while all sliding on a clay court. That's why he's been revolutionary on that surface. And it's only fitting, it's funny to me that Alcaraz is also from Spain, and again had to outlast both of those two guys. But he moves around extremely well. Obviously, he's an innate athlete. He's quick to close to the net. That's what you have to be at the professional level, but especially on clay, you just don't have time. You have to be able to pivot and change direction exponentially faster than you could on hard court where you have more time to recover. And this is someone who also had to deal with a foot injury against Nadal. He injured his foot. He kind of had a swollen ankle. He was suffering an infested blister against Djokovic. And again, what makes this more special to me is here you have an individual who is 19 years old. This guy's 19 years old. He turned pro at 18 a year ago. A year ago. And he entered this tournament number 9 in the world. He's already leaving this tournament number 6 in the world at just 18. He hasn't even been on the tour for over a season. And what I really like about him, he's a very likable guy. You could see that big smile just plastered across his face when he was receiving the trophy, when he is getting cheered for and rooted for by the fans. You could see just that complete bliss and youthful exuberance just at the forefront of his game, the affinity for the sport, the affinity for the competition. He relishes this moment. And what I love about the kid is, and I can call him a kid because I'm older than him, and most of the guys I talk about aren't older. I'm not older than him. But he's absolutely fearless. He isn't intimidated by the opponent he's looking at the other side of the court. He's audacious with his play, and that comes through. And when you've got kind of these young and hungry thoroughbreds who aren't afraid of the nobility, and that's kind of how I describe some of these guys right now. It's impressive to see. He's a young lion, and he's emerging. I mean, again, a year. He's been on the pro tour a year, and he's ranked number 6 already. There's a reason why the adage is ignorance is bliss. And you don't always know what you don't know. And he's in this phase right now where he can just kind of continue to freely play without any expectations on him. And he's maximizing it. And now, obviously, beating Nadal, beating Djokovic, beating Zverev, beating these guys in a best of 3 sets as opposed to a Grand Slam where you're playing them a best of 5 is a completely different beast. To beat Nadal and Djokovic 3 complete sets as opposed to 2 is a different animal altogether. But the fact of the matter is, he seems like someone that has the athleticism, that has the motor, that has the determination and the drive to sustain it, to really sustain it. And I think what's great is the sport of tennis right now, I keep talking about this, it's in such great hands because it's moving in an incredible direction. We've got the cabinet, we've got for lack of a better term, we've got the nobility with the GOATs. We got Federer, we got Nadal, we got Djokovic. We've got the newer kind of oligarchy with Medvedev and Zverev and Tsitsipas. We've got other members of the aristocracy in there with Berrettini and Andrei Rublev. And now we're ushering in this new talent that's ascending, these young guys that are coming in, guys like Alcaraz, like Taylor Fritz, like Felix Auger Aliassime, Denis Shapovalov. We have great young talent coming up that's knocking on the door. And so it doesn't feel like there is as large of a drop-off today from guys like Nadal, Federer, and Djokovic to the next tier of guys. Now, again, part of it is those guys are getting older, and that's just kind of what happens with age. But it's more so to give credit to these younger guys coming up. They want it. They want it for the first time in about 20 years with Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic. guys aren't feared of them. They don't fear them. And it's not out of a lack of reverence for those players. They have tremendous reverence. Those are the three greatest players of all time. But their approach, their mentality is they seek competition. They want that spotlight. They want that smoke. In the words of Ja Morant in the NBA Finals, in the NBA playoffs, they want to run up that chimney. They want the smoke. And Alcaraz is that guy who just says, bring it on. His first year in the tour, he admitted that all he was really trying to gain was experience and words of wisdom from these pros. And now the second time he's around on this tour, he's saying he believes firmly every time he steps onto the court, he's going to beat one of those guys. And I got no reason to think otherwise. So congratulations to him. Again, his fourth title in the year 2022, which I'm going to touch on in a moment in my Malkin's Moments, but major shout out to him. It's a major tournament. To win it in your home country as well adds extra just lure for him. So major shout out to him on that. Okay, final topic, my Malkin's Moments. I got two specific Malkin's Moments that I have to touch on. So the first, just the aforementioned Carlos Alcaraz winning the Madrid Open. He became the youngest winner in Madrid, and as I mentioned, the second youngest to win two Masters 1000 trophies since Rafael Nadal did it in 2005. In 2005. He won Monte Carlo and the Rome titles in 2005. Did Rafael Nadal as an 18-year-old. Now, again, Alcaraz is 19, but Alcaraz had become the youngest player to enter the top 10 rankings since, again, Nadal did it in 2005. What do those two guys have in common? Well, really, beyond the fact that they're both Spaniards, not a whole lot, but you could say that that's kind of a funny coincidence and a small coincidence that they do share that in common. Not to mention, for Alcaraz, it was his seventh straight win over a top 10 player. 7 straight wins over a top 10 player. So you can't call that a fluke. I mean, you can't call that a fluke at all. And he's got the most wins on the tour this year. It was his tour leading fourth title of the year. He's got the most wins on the season with 28, one more than Tsitsipas. And again, he had already won his first Masters 1000 tournament. He won the Miami Open earlier this year. His only real losses, well, I'll touch on that in a second. He actually also won Rio de Janeiro, the tournament in Barcelona. His first career win came at Umag last year. But the only 3 losses that he's had this season, because he's only had 3 losses, 28-3 has been his record. And it's come against Sebastian Korda in Monte Carlo. Sebastian Korda, an up-and-coming American player. He's got a bright future for the American tennis and on the tour. Lost to Nadal at Indian Wells and lost to Berrettini at the Australian Open. So there's really no shame in that. But shout out again to Alcaraz, major props to him. And finally, so the Dallas Mavericks beat the Phoenix Suns yesterday afternoon, 111-101 in Game 4 to tie the series 2-2. And Dorian Finney-Smith, the wing for the Mavericks, dropped a playoff career high 24 points on 8 for 12 shooting from the three-point line, 8 for 13 overall. He had 8 rebounds and an assist. And again, when he is stretching the floor like that for Dallas, this is a completely different team. There is no Tim Hardaway Jr. People forget the Mavericks are playing this series without Tim Hardaway Jr., and so other guys are being forced to step up. Dorian Finney-Smith has to be one of those guys. He's the kind of elite two-way player now for the Mavericks on this team, just signed a contract midway through the season in extension. And if he continues to shoot it, not 8 for 12, but if he's hitting 4, 5, 6 3-pointers in these games for the Mavericks, that's going to be a tall task for the Phoenix Suns. And so I'm pleased to see that he continues to evolve into his own. Again, he can be a game changer for the Mavericks to support Luka. But shout out to Dorian Finney-Smith. Great performance for him. All right, that's all the time that I got for today, finishing a little bit early. Thank you so much for joining me right here on Morning Joe every single Monday and Wednesday morning, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Make sure to subscribe to my YouTube page, Morning Joe, J-O with Jonah Malkin. Follow me on Twitter at Jonah_Malkin or at morning_Joe_JMalkin97 on Instagram and Jonah Malkin on TikTok. Thank you so much. And as always, have a lovely rest of your morning.